Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by MongoDB. As a software engineer, chances are you've crossed paths with MongoDB at some point, whether you're building an app for millions of users or just figuring out a side hustle or a new project. As the most popular non-relational database, MongoDB is intuitive and incredibly easy for development teams to use. Now, with MongoDB Atlas, you can take advantage of MongoDB's flexible document data model as a fully automated cloud service. MongoDB Atlas handles all the costly database operations and admin tasks that you'd rather not spend time on, like security, high availability, data recovery, monitoring, and elastic scaling. So go try MongoDB Atlas today. You can visit mongodb.com/cloudcast to learn more.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a good March as we go along. Hope the spring's starting to get to you in terms of the weather. Kind of an interesting week, a little bit of here and there in terms of the news. We're going to get to Cloud News of the Week here real quickly. Want to thank MongoDB Atlas for being a new sponsor to the show. Excited to have them to be a sponsor of the Cloudcast. So let's jump right ahead to Cloud News of the Week. A couple of things first out of what would be sort of the cloud native area for people that follow that space. The Continuous Delivery Foundation was announced by the Linux Foundation. So this was announced about 10 days ago or so. Brings together a number of things around the CI/CD space, so especially around continuous delivery. So Jenkins X, Spinnaker, a couple of new projects got announced in this space. So kind of an interesting thing that we've created yet another foundation. Sometimes they work out well, sometimes they can be complicated. But new foundation, very much focused around CI and CD. A little bit of overlap with the CNCF because there were some other projects that were over in the CNCF that kind of were in this space as well. So it'll be interesting to see how those two groups work together, if they've worked together as well as the CNCF does with their project. So something to keep an eye on, the Continuous Delivery Foundation. The next thing is that Kubernetes version 1.14 was released this week. So it went GA this week. The real big headline that came out of this one, there's usually half dozen or so new features, 10 new features. But the real big headline for Kubernetes 1.14 was GA of Windows containers. So now Linux containers obviously been around since 1.0. Windows containers are now considered a first-class citizen and GA support in 1.14. So for people that are considering containerizing their Windows applications, that is now something that you will begin to see from most of the cloud providers as well as most of the major commercial software vendors adding support for that. Third thing on the list today was Google at the sort of Game Developers Conference decided to get in the gaming business. So Google made a big announcement, a new gaming service called Stadia. Sort of sounds a little bit like Stadium, but Stadia. The real big thing with this is it is entirely a streaming-based service. So they are very much trying to get away from the boxes, the big hardware that people have to build, gaming systems. And Google is promising that this will be a very, very good experience in terms of they've optimized all the streaming so that it should be somewhat close. So interesting for anybody that's in the gaming space, interested in gaming, Google getting into the gaming space with a new service called Stadia. And then finally, and I'm always curious about how these things are happening. I feel like we're really hitting the second big generation of what's going on with the cloud. The first generation being all the build out of the technology. Obviously, we still see some of that there, but really, looking at sort of the second generation of what's happening as the cloud is able to disrupt some things. So I thought there was an interesting article. UPS has recently, UPS, the delivery company, what can Brown do for you? The big brown trucks that deliver all your packages. UPS is trying to take advantage of their, obviously, expertise in logistics and a huge fleet of transportation trucks and things that will move people around or boxes around. They're actually looking to spin up a new service that will send nurses for in-home vaccinations. So very interesting concept. Obviously, we're seeing, Amazon thinking about getting into the transportation business. People that compete with Amazon, like UPS, are saying, okay, what can we do to expand our core capabilities to maybe move into other things, especially as you have an older generation of people that may need vaccinations. So, definitely an interesting thing to sort of keep an eye on. And we begin to see this interplay and changing of companies that maybe weren't cloud companies to begin with, getting in to compete against companies that are cloud companies. So all very interesting stuff. Again, it's been an interesting year so far. We've seen acquisitions. We've seen some major announcements. We're seeing the second generation of cloud coming along. So all very, very interesting stuff. And we will have all this in the show notes. So very interesting set of news of the week. Thank you all for listening to that. We're going to have a very interesting interview coming up next. We're going to dig into some folks who have lived and breathed what we now call SRE and CRE with some folks from Google. So look forward to the interview. Hey, Cloudcast listeners. Before we get to the show, we want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Datadog. You already know that Datadog is a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed request traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. But did you know that Datadog is great for your Kubernetes environment as well? Datadog's new cluster agent streamlines data collection from large container clusters and allows you to auto-scale Kubernetes workloads based on any metric you're already collecting with Datadog. To start monitoring your Kubernetes clusters, sign up today by going to datadog.com/cloudcast. Sign up for a free 14-day trial. Try out Datadog with your Kubernetes clusters and get a free t-shirt. So if you want to get better performance, better visibility out of your Kubernetes environment, go to datadog.com/cloudcast and try out a free 14-day trial and get your free Datadog t-shirt. And now onto the show. And we're back. Folks, one of the things that we're very lucky to get on this show is a really diverse set of topics. We get a chance to really dig in with, things that you're interested in, but really importantly, we get to speak with people that have been doing things for a long time and bring a lot of experience to the table. So today, very, very excited. We're going to talk a little bit about a concept that I know a number of you have asked us to dig into some more, which is the concept of SRE. And so very, very excited today to have Gustavo Franco, who is part of the customer reliability engineering group at Google and really part of the company that ultimately originally created the whole concept of SRE. So Gustavo, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, before we jump into any of the SRE stuff, you've been at Google for quite a while. Why don't you give folks a little bit of your background, at Google and more importantly, kind of the things around SRE and CRE that really you're passionate about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been at Google for a total of more than 11 years now, doing pretty much SRE work as you're just mentioning. And most recently in CRE, I've been working with Google Cloud customers to help them bootstrap their SRE organizations or to just simply adopt SRE best practices. If you're not ready yet to fully commit to an SRE organization, they can just adopt SRE best practices. So CRE is a team within the SRE organization. Just to make it clear, so CRE is actually a team of the SRE organization. And the C is for customer. And we also, we strongly believe that Google Cloud can move faster if we work with our customers to make their applications more reliable. So that's why the CRE team was created in the first place. We basically realized that it's harder to add more nines of uptime to the platform, to the Google Cloud platform forever, right? So how do we do that? So we basically work with the customers to add nines of uptime to their own application. So the law of diminishing returns gets at play there at the platform level.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I know while there is a lot of new technology that's out there, getting companies to understand the change that has to happen with cloud, whether it's changes in your application, changes in your culture, those things don't really just happen automatically. They don't necessarily just come for free. There is some work that has to go on. I've always looked at the CRE organization and the CRE concept as something that's really important. It's probably as important as the technology itself in helping companies to get successful as they move to the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dave Renson, or director, he likes to say that he thinks more and more companies will have to actually adopt the concept of CRE for themselves, right? So not just reasoning about SRE from a server-side standpoint, but thinking about the customer experience, right? So you can think of this as people start developing applications on top of the Google Cloud platform and other clouds, and they eventually, those applications, they kind of turn into platforms themselves. So you kind of have this chain of, platform on top of platform. Well, if you're building a platform, you're going to have customers actually using your platform in interesting ways. So you should probably be thinking about doing CRE as well. That's kind of one step after what you do with SRE, basically.
Interesting. So let's step back a little bit. You've been doing what's called SRE for quite a while. Even probably before Google was calling it SRE, or at least since a lot of us became familiar with it with the SRE book. Kind kind of frame SRE, the concept for us. I know sometimes it gets kind of blurred together with stuff like DevOps or, kind of give us, having done it for a long time, give us your perspective on SRE and really kind of what are the core things that SRE is trying to accomplish, for applications and for platforms.
So SRE is a specialization of software engineering that is focused on reliability, right? So you could see you have security and privacy. Some companies are going to have a security team where they're going to have lots of software engineers, but they are focused on security. And you also can have a ton of software engineers focusing on privacy. So what is SRE? So SRE is software engineering focused on reliability, but primarily software engineering. How it got started. So at Google in early 2000s, one of our VPs, Ben Traynor, with one of our SVPs, Urs, they realized it was going to be too expensive to run our production systems by simply operating. So the old model of just like doing operations and separating development operations. This is way, way before DevOps was a thing, right? So they realized, well, we cannot just separate dev and ops and keep hiring more ops people on and on. So that's how SRE got started. So Ben Traynor likes to say that SRE is what happens when you hire software engineers and you ask them to establish an operational function. And the side effect is they're going to write a lot of automation, right? So they're going to automate, eliminate workflows, etc. And one thing that I think it's worth mentioning is that at Google, we believe that SRE is really about one key core principle. 100% availability is the wrong target for any system. It's just too expensive to achieve and sometimes even impossible to achieve in the long run. In terms of comparing SRE and operations team, I would also say that SRE does operations, but we attempt to cap the operational work that we do at 50%. And there's reasons for that, right? Because if you cap your time off the work that you're doing at operational at 50%, it means that the side effect that the other half of your time you can allocate to software engineering work, right? And which kind of software engineering work? Well, software engineering work focusing on improving the reliability for the service. We also like to help and improve the services, make one change and improve many production services at once. So kind of we talk about horizontal work, horizontal impact. And the difference between, I would say, SRE and DevOps, SRE is also all about getting the developers to do some of the operational work themselves and also internalize the constraints of production. So trying to include developers in the production process. And that's how we overlap with DevOps. We also like to say that then at the end of the day, SRE is an implementation of DevOps. So DevOps is a lot more, I would say, wider in terms of culture and approaches. SRE is an implementation, a highly opinionated implementation of DevOps, but kind of a subset of what DevOps would cover. I also have a more detailed reference on the difference between SRE and DevOps. We can add to the show notes, I think.
Yeah, no, that would be great. That would be great. Hey, there's a concept in SRE that I would love to have somebody sort of explain to me. I've heard it talked about, but I've never really dug into it. And you kind of touched on it. You said, your goal isn't 100% uptime reliability because, all nines forever, it becomes increasingly expensive, sort of unreachably expensive, if you will, and
right.
The odds of you getting it right. But there's some budgets that you guys talk about in terms of kind of failure budgets or, sort of the concept of like, we know there's going to be failure. We want to measure, kind of the ends of that. And then you do some things to experiment around those budgets, if I remember right.
Yeah, so we talk about an error budget policy, and also SLO with consequences. So let me explain those concepts a little bit. So if you say, okay, we cannot achieve 100% of availability, just speak availability, but really right. Objectives can be about, you can talk about freshness of a data set or correctness of a data set. But availability, let's just talk about that indicator, that objective, to make it easy, because you can also include latency, right? But anyways, an error budget is 100% minus your goal. So let's say I know I can have this service, or the customers are not going to be unhappy if the service is offering no better than 99% of uptime. And we can talk about ways to measure that, right? But anyways, let's just assume that I have a customer base that is okay with 99% of uptime.
Okay.
We talk about the error budget is 100% minus 99, so that's 1%. An error budget policy is what happens if you violate that 1% over the time window that you have. This SLAs, by the way, doesn't need to be part of your contract. This is only internal. How you're tracking, how you're approaching the business internally. Your SLA tends to be a lot, quote unquote, looser than that, right? Because the SLA tends to, if you violate your SLA, there's a financial credit, some kind of penalty to the business. Mm-hmm. So you want to put internal SLO line to be much more strict than what you have in your SLA. In terms of testing error budgets, we then do a lot of what some folks out there are talking about, chaos engineering, which we internally talk about their disaster recovery testing, to run services at SLO, which means, well, think of like a chain of 3 or 4 services piled up. One is A is calling B, B is calling C, C is calling D. Let's go and test running C at SLO to see what happens to B and A on top. So that's kind of common concept that we talk about internally of like, let's run a disaster recovery test and let's run C at SLO to see what happens. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I think it's a good framing because it starts to help people understand, there is the opportunity for, for some work, kind of to better explain to people like, you will have some downtimes. There are some costs that are associated with trying to fix them, but there are ways that we can, kind of explore that. But I like the way that you frame it. It's always in the context of what's the customer's objective, what's the business objective, and making sure that, the thing you're delivering is going to meet their demands, not some just internal number for internal number's sake.
Right. Yeah. One thing important to add to that, like the 1% error budget that I was saying, the policy, like what do you do if there's if you go beyond 1% in a given period of time that you established? We don't talk about per customer. So I'm not saying, oh, you should be okay for every customer to have 1% failure. This is not per customer. This is over sets of customers. Sure, you can eventually establish per customer SLOs as well.
Yep.
It's actually a good practice. But initially, people start talking about overall customer overall error budget, overall failure rate that your customer can tolerate. And it's we can also add information to the notes. We have a good one, I think, a good article on tuning up your SLIs to align those SLIs and SLOs with business metrics. So gotcha. Customer happiness, basically.
Excellent. We'll work on getting that in the show notes as well if we can find it. One of the things I've heard about the SRE model at Google, and this may extend to other locations or other companies and so forth that have adopted it, is even within Google, while you've worked on lots of different projects and different services, SRE isn't necessarily like always in every development group. Sometimes they almost have to request that SRE be part of something. Is that necessarily the case still? And if it is the case, how do you avoid, them looking at you as being like, oh, okay, we can just throw stuff on the other side of the wall and Gustavo's SRE team will fix stuff for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a very good one. You're correct that like we don't have an SRE team per service or per product because that's not a good way to scale. We talk about sublinear scale of every group, right? But also SRE. You don't want to necessarily have this one-to-one map because the more you grow, the more you add services, the more you add teams. And this is not just true for Google, it's true for any company, right? So the more you add anything to your business customers, you don't want to tie any of that to like, oh, I need to add an SRE team now that we have 100 more customers. So that's not how we think about creating SRE teams. But from experience in terms of avoiding that problem you described, people throwing things over the wall to like, oh yeah, Gustavo's SRE team is going to handle that. I think the combination of having buy-in from senior management and service level objectives. That's why we talk so much about SLOs, because it tends to smooth all the discussion between development velocity. If I can tell the developers, hey, you're free to launch more often because you're not burning your SLO, you're not burning your whole budget, go ahead and do the things you want to do, back to like DevOps principle, right? Like they building to be involved at all. So many not manage themselves, but they can have the developers, and back to the developers acting as DevOps.
Gotcha. No, and I like that. I really like that there is
to quote unquote handhold every process.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, and I like that. I like the idea that there really is a kind of a two-way communication, two-way relationship between the teams, and that there's a framework for how to have that conversation. It's not sort of a linear pipeline or a linear set of work. It's going to be kind of bi-directional. I like that a lot. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, you can, back to the SRE, like I was saying at the top, right? Like I'm helping companies starting SRE organizations or adopt SRE best practices. You can adopt several SRE best practices without SLOs. The thing is, I've seen many teams and companies failing because then they don't get to SLO, they don't start with SLOs, and then those discussions, exactly those problems start to arise, right? So then it's much harder to prevent folks, developers, and that discomfort between developer and SRE. So that's why we think SLO is key.
Gotcha. I want to transition a little bit to the CRE concept because I know I've had an opportunity to attend a lot of Google events. The Google culture is very strong, but it is, there is a sort of Google way of doing things that I'm sure goes on within the company. Can you talk a little bit? I mean, you don't have to get into any sort of customer specifics, but how do you transition from, Google has done SRE for a while, we've got people with a lot of experience of this, to you're now doing it with a customer, either helping them build their own team or working with them as they come to Google Cloud. Like, what are some of the things from just purely a culture perspective that you have to work on between Google knowing their culture and how they do SRE and the customer wanting to be better, work with CRE, but having a very different culture than Google?
Yeah, that's a very good one. I don't claim that we have a set formula here. Back to your point, it varies per customer. So one thing is being humble, right? Understanding that every customer's culture is different and learning with them too. Back to the two-way street. We tend to sit down and ask them not just about their services and not having just a technical conversation, but also having the soft skills, the cultural conversation. Like, where is their company in terms of internal culture about, like, would it be acceptable? Like, are your C-level executives, if you're not one of them, or your VPs, if you're not one of them, comfortable with the concept of SLOs? And some companies, right, the technical folks are trying to bring the SRE practice in. They're going to say, no, yeah, my company's not there yet. I need your help. I'm trying to get my company there. And we work with them too. And in some other companies, is like, yeah, there's buy-in from senior leadership. And that at that point, right, the concern that we have is, okay, you have buy-in for senior leadership, it's top-down. Are the production folks or the operational team that you might have today, are they buying into that as well, right? Are they buying into that change? It's on a case-by-case basis, basically.
I gotcha. Yeah, and that makes sense. I think the thing that I've always seen with companies, especially as they're changing, they will take something that is looked at as very much a best practice in the industry. So whether it's the SRE book because they can get access to it, maybe it's the story of some of Gene Kim's books like the Phoenix Project, whatever it might be. And then there is this process of adapting it to your culture. And it's like you said, sometimes it's top down, so the executives have a lot of buy-in. In other cases, it's being driven bottom up, and they're trying to get executive buy-in, but they really understand the technical problem.
I do recommend every single customer is kind of consistent across the board. Is that we tell the customers consistently to pick one application or workflow and one team. We highly recommend, because we haven't really seen success when a customer says, I have 5 applications, I have 10 workflows, and 5 teams that I could flip to SRE model, to flip them all at once. So we say basically canary, right? Gradual rollout. One of these 3 best practices we also apply to organizational change here, to do one at a time. And then let's measure, let's assess what's been successful in your company within your culture, and try to help them to replicate that throughout more teams.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Make sure you understand it, figure out where it's going to fit, and failures and pros and cons makes total sense. I want to shift gears a little bit again. Talk about, you mentioned, we're seeing some of these new concepts technology wise, things like AI ops and chaos engineering can come into play in a positive way to try and make applications more robust, make environments more reliable. How can SRE or CRE play a role in helping that, both from introducing those types of technologies into reliability, but also kind of educating people on, this isn't just pure craziness. There is a structure to how these things like chaos engineering actually works.
Right, yeah. So coincidentally, I've done quite a bit of chaos engineering related work here at Google as part of a program that we call DIRT. I think I mentioned this earlier. It stands for Disaster Recovery Testing. We've been doing this for more than 10 years now. I'm personally not a huge fan of the chaos engineering term. It's a pet peeve of mine because chaos is the exact thing we're trying to avoid, right? But as a growing practice, it is super useful. I'm really excited that this is happening. I believe SRE can contribute to those reliability / resilience tests, adding more discipline around it, right? So what is it that we're testing? What we're doing, the results or side effects of this test? What is the feedback loop that we have, or the feedback loops that we have to improve service quality for the customer, right, for the business? And are we refining SLO? So like, do we even have SLO established? Because if you don't have an error budget, if you don't have SLOs, if you don't have goals, are you just breaking things for the sake of breaking things? And I know there's quite a few people that are also thinking in those terms, right? Like, let's not just cause chaos, let's prevent chaos. And if I were to guess here, I think SREs will do a lot more integration work around those chaos engineering runners, right? The software actually running those tests and monitoring, observing, and roll out, right? Kind of tying all this SRE toolkit, if I may, together, right? To kind of work together. Because if you think of a service that has established an SLO, I'm running a task. Well, I want to stop that task if it's causing disruption in production way before I wipe out all of my error budget for that month or that quarter. Otherwise, I know I'm causing too much customer pain.
Yeah. How does and again, I appreciate the sort of dislike of the term chaos, but it's kind of out there. How have you found sort of introducing that concept of chaos engineering or sort of reliability engineering works with people that haven't really been introduced to it? How do you introduce the concept, and how do you get them to not freak out originally? I mean, when you first hear about it, you're like, oh my gosh, you're gonna kill things in production when they're live. And have you found any tips to how to explain it to people to sort of make them feel somewhat more comfortable?
Yeah, so we tell people that are uncomfortable, basically, you start with role playing. So run a theoretical test. And it's hard for people to say no to that, right? So it's like, okay, let's not use the software. Let's just role play. So you kind of also exercise instant response. It's called, and once people get comfortable to the theoretical exercise, it's like, okay, now we should have, if you don't have, we should have known production systems, right? So you're staging your canary, your QA environment. Can we run the test there now? So we did a role play. Usually when you do role play, people haven't tested anything yet. They will find a lot of problems to resolve just by role playing. And then we move to known production systems. And then the third stage is, let's test in production, but then we don't need to test in all production systems. If we have some services in multiple zones, let's test in one zone instead of testing in all zones. And it also helps a ton when you get to production testing, back to if you have your error budget established, because then you can say, well, we're not going to test way above the customer pain. Some people never get there, right? So some people are like, no for production test. I'm going to stop at non-production, and that's what I'm comfortable with. And that's okay. Times multiple services, right? So you got to improve resilience overall. So that's kind of what we're seeing over the years here, where you have different services and different teams. It's kind of a journey, right? So different stages, different tiers of testing.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And I think there's, beyond the things that you pointed out, which are really important, the role-playing aspect, make sure they feel comfortable with it, tested in non-production environments. I suspect there's probably a certain amount of just basic education for people that maybe have lived, in their own data centers where, the fear of, if I lose this really important machine, I'm stuck because I can't get another machine really fast. Whereas in the cloud, I mean, you literally can get another machine, virtual instance of something, almost immediately, and you can put it anywhere you want to. So there's almost also, I would suspect, the education you've got to do about explaining to them that the cloud is different. It doesn't, it's got a little more flexibility than maybe you were used to in the more physical on-prem data center world. Yeah,
precisely. Yeah, you can build highly reliable systems on top of public clouds, but they are fundamentally different than any kind of private data center that you have.
So obviously, as you're doing this reliability work, chaos work, you're going to get results that come back, or you will have broken some things. Have you found there's certain ways to have conversations with application teams so they understand this wasn't just breaking for breaking's sake? Are there more kind of positive ways that they'll look at this, or examples that you've seen where they really start to embrace the idea that this is going to be built into the system so that the system gets better over time?
Yeah, like you need to find the champions, right, in every team, and also around those teams that might be resisting the idea. We're lucky at Google that we have been doing this for more than a decade now. So we have tons of champions throughout the company, right? So if a team is resisting the idea, we have, a person that might be either part of the team or around that team that will champion exactly the concepts that I describe and why it's important to test. So my recommendation for folks out there is if you're part of a quote unquote chaos team within a company, how is it that you're reframing that from it's not about causing chaos, it's about preventing it? And do you have folks on those teams that you're working with, do you have champions, right? They're buying into the concept, and can you convince them first to influence those folks that might be resisting the concept?
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I want to ask you one last question before we go, and this has been very, very interesting, Gustavo. Thank you for all the time so far.
Of course.
As let's say you're onboarding a new customer through the CRE process, maybe, just based on your experience having done this for quite a while, both CRE and SRE, are there a couple of things that you always tell people in terms of, look, these are some of the positive things that you're going to get out of this engagement, this process, and these are the things I hope you share with the rest of your team so that you understand, why this engagement and this, attempt to change things is so important. Like there's sort of like, 2 or 3 things that you're always like, this is what I hope we get out of this.
Yeah, I think one thing for let me separate from so for customers and for more junior SREs, right? So for more junior SREs, what I think they get out of this experience, and I should also mention we also have a program for developers to come and to participate in SRE in a rotation fashion, like 6 to 12 months. They can sit with us and do that work. So 2 or 3 things that I tell them, what is it they're going to get out of this is you're going to learn more about, it's a deep dive on how to run production systems at scale, right? So right at the top. The second thing in terms of adopting SRE best practices, etc., I think you get to learn back to we talk so much about SLOs. There is also blameless postmortems. There is a ton of in the SRE best practice that can be summarized as failing is okay and honest mistakes are fine. So I also tell that to more junior SREs. And I also tell the same thing to customers, just that customers are starting SRE organizations. What I tell them is it's likely that you're going to learn a lot more about your business. And of course, if they already know a ton about the business, if they already know a ton about the customer, and they're quote unquote just running production, they can connect the dots, right? But it's that experience of, if you're thinking of this as I'm just gonna sit here and run the production systems and I can ignore the customer side of things, or I can ignore other aspects of the business, that's not how SRE sees it. So that's what I would tell a customer leader. You either know a ton about your customer and your business, or you're going to have to know to link that to SLOs, SRO budgets, and production. And those things are linked together, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're a business, you're trying to provide a good customer experience, you cannot be completely disconnected and just think that, I'm operations, business and sales are separate, and there's a developer team building features, and I just need to do ops. That's not how SRE approaches the problem at all.
Yeah, no, and I think that last point is just so incredibly important. It's, like you said, you may think that what you're doing is really just focus on the technology, make sure it works, make sure you're super knowledgeable about it. But, I think that sort of dual focus on what is this technology ultimately doing? How is it impacting the business? How does it impact your customers is so important to have, top of mind for people. I think it's great that you guys make that a key point of how you teach the process and how you help people learn from stuff. Listen, I want to wrap it up with that. Gustavo, thank you so much for the time today, folks. Gustavo is going to be, giving or talking about a lot of these similar topics at the Velocity Conference in June in San Jose. So if you get a chance to get out there, it'd be great. We will have some discount codes in the show notes if folks want to attend the event. O'Reilly's been a great partner with us, so we're very, very excited to work with them. Gustavo, if there's some folks who may want to, engage with you, maybe ask some questions about some of the things we talked about today, are there good ways for them to maybe get in touch with you, or other places where maybe you may be speaking about this in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Twitter at Stratus. I will also be at Google Cloud Next in April. We'll have the 59 launch again, so the Google SRE launch, so we're helping to coordinate some of the activities. And I'm also at SRECon late March. Excellent.
Very, very cool. Well, listen, folks, hope you enjoyed that. I know, for myself, it was, I've been wanting to dig into the SRE space, the CRE space quite a bit more. I've had a chance to read parts of the book, but it's great to talk to somebody who lives and breathes this every day. So Gustavo, thank you so much for your time again today. Folks, thanks as always for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating the show on iTunes. And for that, we're going to wrap it up. We will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.